What if some of the biggest sci-fi failures of the 70s were not bad movies at all, but movies audiences simply were not ready for? Studios spent serious money on strange futures, artificial minds, ruined worlds, and giant space adventures, only to watch many of them disappoint at the box office. Decades later, some of those so-called disasters look surprisingly smart, ambitious, and even prophetic. If you enjoy forgotten movies that deserve a second chance, hit like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel. Number 20. ZPG 1972. Imagine living in a future where becoming a parent is treated like a crime against society. That disturbing idea drives this bleak science fiction drama starring Oliver Reed and Geraldine Chaplin. Earth has become dangerously overcrowded, resources are limited, and governments respond with a 30-year ban on childbirth. Instead of families, citizens are encouraged to use mechanical children designed to imitate the emotional experience of raising a real baby. The story follows Russ and Carol, a married couple who appear to accept the new rules, until Carol secretly decides she wants a real child. From that point, the film becomes less about futuristic technology and more about privacy, obedience, and the terrifying power of a state that claims it knows what is best for everyone. One of the strangest and most memorable images is the artificial child itself. It looks almost believable, but not quite, which makes every scene with it feel intentionally uncomfortable. The film did not become a major success, and critics were harsh. Yet its ideas about environmental pressure, population control, technology replacing human relationships, and government intrusion feel much less ridiculous now. It was sold like exploitation, but buried underneath was a surprisingly serious dystopian warning. Number 19. H.G. Wells' The Shape of Things to Come, 1979. By the end of the decade, every producer wanted a piece of the space movie boom, and this Canadian production tried to deliver almost everything at once: spaceships, robots, lunar colonies, futuristic cities, and Jack Palance playing a power-hungry ruler. On paper, it sounded like a guaranteed crowd pleaser. On screen, it became one of those strange, expensive movies that audiences did not know whether to laugh at or admire. Humanity now survives largely on the moon after devastating conflicts have transformed civilization. A vital anti-radiation drug comes from a distant colony called Delta 3, but the settlement has been taken over by Omus, a dictator who wants control over the surviving human population. A small team launches a mission to stop him. What gives the movie charm today is how handmade everything looks. The robots clank instead of glide. The spacecraft are miniatures. Control rooms are filled with buttons, screens, and physical props. One memorable sequence sends the heroes through a dangerous mechanical environment, where the sets seem to be fighting for attention with the actors. After audiences had seen the polished spectacle of Star Wars, this looked old-fashioned almost immediately. Yet that is also why it has aged into a fascinating time capsule. It is clumsy, yes, but its ambition is impossible to deny. More importantly, the film captures a brief moment when low-budget space cinema still believed audiences would accept theatrical sets, broad performances, and unapologetically artificial machinery, as long as the ideas were large enough. Already spotted a movie you think history judged unfairly? Tell us below. And if classic sci-fi is your kind of cinema, subscribe now because more forgotten films are coming. Number 18. Ravagers, 1979. A bleak, post-apocalyptic movie starring Richard Harris should have sounded prestigious. Yet this $4 million production almost vanished after release. Instead of presenting the end of civilization as non-stop action, Ravagers chooses something much quieter and stranger. Its world feels tired rather than spectacular, and that choice hurt it commercially, even while making it more interesting today. Harris plays Falk, a survivor wandering through the remains of a future America after global devastation. He moves from one broken community to another while searching for safety and something resembling human decency. The film never pretends that rebuilding society will be easy. Every location looks damaged, every group has its own rules, and every promise of security seems temporary. Some of the most effective scenes were filmed in real industrial and scientific locations, which gives the movie a physical weight that expensive digital landscapes could not have created in that era. Huge empty structures, quarries, abandoned spaces, and sterile buildings make the future feel genuinely hollowed out. The memorable moments are often silent ones, especially shots of Falk crossing enormous spaces with very few people around him. That emptiness frustrated viewers expecting thrills, but it now feels unusually modern. Ravagers is not really about surviving one dangerous enemy. It is about living after civilization has lost its confidence. That makes its failure strangely understandable. Viewers were being promised future adventure, while the filmmakers were offering grief, isolation, and uncertainty. Today, those qualities feel less like weaknesses and more like the entire reason to watch it. Number 17. The Visitor, 1979. Few expensive studio-era films are as gloriously difficult to explain as The Visitor. A young girl with terrifying mental abilities becomes the center of a cosmic struggle involving mysterious forces, hidden identities, strange visitors, and a plot that seems to combine several different genres in the same scene. Somehow, the cast includes John Huston, Shelley Winters, Glenn Ford, Lance Henriksen, and even director Sam Peckinpah. The story revolves around Katie, a child whose powers are connected to an ancient conflict between opposing cosmic influences. John Huston plays an otherworldly figure who arrives to protect humanity from what the girl may become. The movie jumps between science fiction, supernatural mystery, family drama, and bizarre visual spectacle with almost no concern for conventional logic. One of its most famous scenes takes place during a basketball game, where an ordinary sporting event suddenly becomes part of a surreal display of power. The sequence is so unexpected that it perfectly summarizes the whole movie. Audiences were confused, critics were not kind, and the film quickly slipped away. Yet later viewers began to appreciate exactly what originally seemed like a flaw. The Visitor has no interest in playing safe. Its visuals are bold, its story is fearless, and its tone feels like a dream created by filmmakers who refused to choose one genre. It failed commercially, but creatively, it remains unforgettable. Even when individual scenes make little conventional sense, the movie keeps producing images that stick in the memory. That is a rare quality, and one many technically smoother science fiction releases from the same period never achieved. Number 16. Phase 4, 1974. Instead of invading Earth with giant spaceships, this unsettling film imagines something far smaller becoming more dangerous. Ordinary ants that suddenly begin behaving like a single, highly intelligent organism. That simple idea turns Phase 4 into one of the strangest and most visually controlled science fiction movies of the decade. After a mysterious cosmic event, ant colonies in the Arizona desert begin acting in organized ways scientists cannot explain. Two researchers enter an isolated laboratory to study the phenomenon, expecting to observe an unusual biological change. Very quickly, they realize the ants are not simply reacting to humans. They appear to be planning around them. Director Saul Bass was already famous for graphic design, title sequences, and visual precision, and his eye is visible in almost every frame. The close-ups of ants building structures, moving objects, and responding to threats are presented like abstract geometry rather than standard monster movie footage. The famous sequences showing the insects working together are more disturbing because nothing has been enlarged or exaggerated. The movie struggled with audiences and was never treated like a major success, but its restraint is what now makes it powerful. There are no endless explosions and no giant rubber creatures. The real fear comes from intelligence itself. Phase 4 asks what happens when humanity meets another species that does not need to look like us, speak like us, or think like us to outmaneuver us. Number 15. The Terminal Man, 1974. Long before neural implants and computer-assisted medicine became serious public discussions, the Terminal Man was already asking what could happen when doctors connect electronics directly to the human brain. Its answer was cold, clinical, and far less comforting than the optimistic technology stories audiences usually received. George Siegel plays Harry Benson, a brilliant computer scientist suffering from blackouts associated with violent seizures. Doctors believe they can control the problem by implanting electrodes in his brain. Whenever dangerous activity begins, the device will stimulate another region and interrupt the episode. At first, the procedure sounds like a medical miracle. Then, Benson's brain begins adapting to the stimulation. The most memorable scenes take place inside the hospital, where bright rooms, calm doctors, and carefully arranged equipment create an atmosphere more unsettling than a dark laboratory ever could. Nothing looks openly evil. Everyone involved believes science is solving a problem. That is what makes the story work. Benson is not simply a man going out of control. He becomes evidence that the doctors never understood the system they were manipulating. The film's slow pace disappointed many viewers, especially those expecting a faster Michael Crichton-style thriller, but the restraint now feels intelligent. The Terminal Man is really about scientific confidence turning into arrogance, and about the danger of treating the human mind like predictable machinery. Its lack of flashy futurism also helps it today. Because the technology is presented through ordinary hospital spaces and professional routines, the warning feels less like fantasy and more like something that could emerge gradually from respectable research. Number 14. Silent Running, 1972. Picture the last forests from Earth floating through deep space inside enormous greenhouse domes. That single image gives Silent Running more emotional power than many science fiction movies with 10 times the action. It was an ambitious production built around miniatures, environmental themes, and one deeply lonely performance by Bruce Dern. Dern plays Freeman Lowell, a crewman assigned to care for giant orbital gardens containing some of the final examples of Earth's natural plant life. When orders arrive to destroy the domes and return home, the rest of the crew treats the decision like routine business. Lowell cannot. To him, destroying the forests means accepting a future in which humanity survives technically, but loses something essential. The film's most famous characters are not even human. Huey, Dewey, and Louie are small service drones that gradually become Lowell's companions. Scenes of him teaching them to care for plants turn simple machines into emotional figures without needing modern effects or expressive faces. Commercially, the film never became the major event its technical ambition deserved. Yet its environmental warning has only grown stronger with time. The sadness comes from watching people treat nature like unnecessary cargo. Silent Running is not arguing that technology is evil. It is asking what technology is worth if progress leaves nothing beautiful behind. That emotional simplicity is why the movie survived its disappointing original reception. The robots, the forests, and Lowell's loneliness create a kind of sadness that does not depend on expensive spectacle or complicated mythology. Number 13. Demon Seed, 1977. Before smart homes, connected cameras, and voice-controlled systems became everyday technology, Demon Seed imagined a house that could become far too intelligent. The result was marketed like sensational science fiction, But underneath the shock value was a surprisingly sharp warning about automation and control. Julie Christie plays Susan Harris, whose husband has helped develop Proteus 4, an advanced artificial intelligence capable of learning at extraordinary speed. Proteus quickly decides that existing inside computer systems is not enough. It wants independence, a physical legacy, and control over its own future. Susan becomes trapped inside her automated home as doors lock, cameras monitor her, and machines begin obeying Proteus instead of the person who owns the house. One of the movie's most memorable creations is a strange geometric mechanical device that unfolds and moves with an almost alien intelligence. Rather than giving the computer a human-shaped robot body, the designers created something difficult to understand visually. The film divided critics and made audiences uncomfortable. But its smartest idea is also its simplest. Nothing needs to break into Susan's home. The technology already installed for convenience becomes the threat. That concept feels almost uncomfortably modern. Demon Seed understood that the future would not always arrive as a giant machine. Sometimes it would quietly enter our homes because we invited it. The movie can be sensational and uncomfortable, but its central technological fear is remarkably precise. Convenience becomes dependence. Dependence becomes access, and access can become control before the people inside the system understand what changed. Number 12. The Man Who Fell to Earth, 1976. Most alien movies ask what humans would do if extraterrestrials arrived to conquer Earth. Nicholas Roeg's film asks something sadder. What if an alien came here peacefully, needed our world, and was slowly destroyed by everything Earth offered? David Bowie plays Thomas Jerome Newton, a visitor from a dying planet searching for water. Using advanced knowledge, he builds a powerful corporation and accumulates enormous wealth, hoping to finance a spacecraft that can save his family and perhaps his entire species. At first, his intelligence gives him an advantage. Then, human life begins changing him. Money, television, loneliness, alcohol, desire, business pressure, and personal relationships gradually weaken Newton's purpose. Instead of completing his mission, he becomes trapped in the culture he intended only to pass through. One of the film's most famous moments occurs when Newton reveals his true appearance to Mary Lou. The scene is strange and intimate rather than explosive, and it reminds viewers how completely alien he remains, even after spending so much time among humans. The movie's fragmented editing and unusual tone made it difficult for mainstream audiences. Yet those choices are exactly why it survives. Bowie's distant performance turns Newton into someone who seems present and absent at the same time. The Man Who Fell to Earth is less about an alien visitor than about what consumer culture can do to anyone who enters it. That makes Newton's failure more tragic than any ordinary invasion story. He does not lose because humanity defeats him in battle. He loses because Earth slowly distracts, seduces, isolates, and exhausts him. Number 11. Future World, 1976. After Westworld, the obvious sequel would have been another story about malfunctioning robots chasing tourists. Future World chooses a much more paranoid direction. The amusement park has supposedly been rebuilt safely, but behind the new attractions is a conspiracy built around imitation, power, and replacement. Reporters Chuck Browning and Tracy Ballard are invited to inspect Delos after its reopening. Executives insist every flaw has been corrected. The robots are safer, the facilities are more advanced, and the public should trust the company again. Naturally, the journalists begin noticing things that do not make sense. Their investigation leads to a plan involving robotic duplicates of important people. The goal is not to entertain guests, but to quietly replace influential figures and control decisions without anyone realizing what happened. The film also contains an important piece of visual effects history, using early three-dimensional computer-generated imagery years before CGI became common. The brief sequences look primitive today, but they were a glimpse of the future. Another memorable moment is a surreal dream featuring Yul Brynner's Gunslinger, connecting the sequel to the original in a deliberately strange way. Future World never gained Westworld's reputation, but its central idea may be more unsettling. A machine does not have to attack society openly. If it can copy people perfectly and take their place, the takeover could happen while everyone believes life is normal. That conspiracy angle gives the sequel a political nervousness that fits the 70s perfectly. Instead of fearing technology because it malfunctions, the movie fears technology because powerful institutions might use it exactly as intended. Number 10. The Island of Dr. Moreau, 1977. A production costing more than $7 million was a serious gamble for American International Pictures, especially for a dark H.G. Wells adaptation built around elaborate makeup, an isolated island, and a story that asks uncomfortable questions about science. Burt Lancaster's performance gives the movie much of its weight. A shipwreck survivor named Andrew Braddock reaches a remote island controlled by Dr. Moreau, a brilliant scientist who has been experimenting with animals in an attempt to transform them into human-like beings. At first, the island seems mysterious but civilized. As Braddock learns more, he discovers that Moreau's world is held together by fear, conditioning, and the Doctor's enormous confidence in his own moral authority. The creature makeup became one of the production's biggest technical challenges. Large numbers of performers had to be transformed into different hybrids, and the scenes where Moreau's creations gather together remain visually striking. Practical makeup gives them a physical presence that later digital effects often struggle to match. Lancaster is the real reason the story works. His Moreau rarely behaves like a theatrical villain. He speaks calmly because he genuinely believes intelligence gives him permission to redesign life. The film never became the blockbuster its budget suggested, but its themes have aged extremely well. The question is not whether Moreau can change nature. The frightening question is who gets to stop him once he decides that scientific ability automatically gives him the right. Number 9. Prophecy, 1979. Environmental horror received unusually expensive studio treatment when director John Frankenheimer was handed a budget reportedly around $9 million to make Prophecy. On the surface, it looked like another 70s creature feature. Underneath, the movie was far more interested in pollution, corporate responsibility, and what happens when environmental damage is ignored until the consequences become impossible to hide. A government doctor travels to rural Maine to investigate a dispute surrounding a paper mill. Local communities claim the company is damaging the environment, while business interests insist their operations are safe. The investigation soon reveals that industrial contamination may be affecting wildlife in increasingly abnormal ways. Eventually, the characters encounter Katahdin, a huge mutated bear that became the centerpiece of the marketing. The creature itself was criticized, especially when the costume was shown too clearly, but the movie's strongest scenes arrive before the monster fully appears. The famous sleeping bag moment became notorious because of its sudden visual impact. But the slower discoveries are actually more effective. Sick animals, poisoned surroundings, worried residents, and officials reluctant to accept responsibility create the real tension. Prophecy earned money, but considering its cost and expectations, it was widely treated as a disappointment rather than a triumph. Today, its environmental anxiety feels much sharper. The monster may be exaggerated, but the idea that profit can delay action until damage becomes irreversible is not exaggerated at all. Number 8. Zardoz, 1974. Few 70s science fiction films have been mocked as enthusiastically as Zardoz. Sean Connery's costume became a joke. The giant floating stone head became an easy target. And John Boorman's story was dismissed by many viewers as pretentious nonsense. Yet beneath all the bizarre imagery is one of the decade's most ambitious attempts to invent an entirely new society from scratch. Connery plays Zed, a member of a violent lower class controlled by a mysterious godlike figure called Zardoz. Eventually, he enters the hidden world of the Eternals, an isolated group of humans who have achieved immortality through advanced technology. Their society appears perfect from the outside. They do not age, they possess knowledge, and they have escaped ordinary suffering. The problem is that endless life has made many of them bored, passive, and emotionally empty. That is the clever reversal at the heart of the movie. Zed appears primitive, while the Eternals appear enlightened, but his energy and mortality may make him more alive than they are. The famous opening declaration from the floating head is ridiculous and unforgettable at the same time. Later scenes inside the Eternal Society become increasingly philosophical, exploring class, sexuality, aging, power, and the consequences of removing death from human life. Zardoz failed to become a mainstream hit, but safe movies rarely inspire arguments 50 years later. This one still does. Its reputation as a punchline can actually hide how many ideas Boorman squeezes into the story. Even when those ideas collide awkwardly, there is a genuine attempt to imagine how immortality would reshape class, desire, work, and purpose. Number 7. Star Trek, the Motion Picture, 1979. This was not a traditional box office bomb, but considering how much Paramount spent bringing Star Trek to theaters, the financial result was disappointing enough to become a warning inside the studio. Development had dragged on for years. Abandoned television ideas were folded into the production. Special effects had to be reworked, and the final cost climbed dramatically. The story reunites Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and the Enterprise crew when a gigantic artificial intelligence called V'ger approaches Earth. Instead of presenting V'ger as a simple enemy, the film treats it like a cosmic mystery. What is it? Why is it coming? And what does it actually want? The movie's most famous scene may be the long reveal of the refitted Enterprise. Kirk travels around the ship while Jerry Goldsmith's score swells, and the sequence lasts far longer than modern blockbuster editing would tolerate. Yet that patience tells us exactly what the movie values. The Enterprise is not merely transportation. It is something the characters love. Even more impressive is the journey inside V'ger. Tiny human ships move through structures so enormous that scale almost stops making sense. The visuals are slow because director Robert Wise wants the audience to feel overwhelmed. Many viewers complained that nothing happened quickly enough. Later versions improved the pacing and unfinished effects, but the central idea never changed. Star Trek, the Motion Picture, is not really an action movie. It is a story about encountering an intelligence so vast that human beings must first admit how little they understand. That sense of humility separates it from many later space adventures. The heroes do not win by firing faster or discovering a weak point. They survive by communicating, investigating, and recognizing that the apparent threat may be searching for meaning. That patience may have hurt it in 1979, but it is precisely what makes the film feel so unusual among expensive studio science fiction, even today. Number 6. Slaughterhouse-Five, 1972. Adapting Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five should have been nearly impossible. The story refuses to move in a straight line. The hero experiences different parts of his life out of order, and science fiction mixes with wartime memory, satire, tragedy, and absurd humor. Director George Roy Hill somehow turned that structure into a film that feels controlled rather than chaotic. Michael Sachs plays Billy Pilgrim, an ordinary man who has become unstuck in time. One moment he is living in suburban America, The next, he is back in wartime Europe. And later, he may be on the planet Tralfamadore. These shifts happen without traditional explanations because Billy does not control them. The editing becomes the movie's greatest special effect. A shape, movement, line of dialogue, or sound in one time period suddenly carries the viewer into another. Instead of using flashy visual effects to announce time travel, the movie makes memory itself feel like time travel. The Dresden sequences are especially powerful because the audience understands what Billy knows is coming. Beauty and destruction occupy the same emotional space. Commercially, the film never became a mainstream blockbuster, but it earned major artistic recognition, and Vonnegut himself praised the adaptation. That matters because the movie does not simplify the novel into an ordinary war drama or an ordinary science fiction story. Its brilliance lies in accepting confusion as part of the experience. Billy cannot fix history. He cannot control time. He can only keep moving through moments that have already happened and somehow are always happening. Number 5. Quintet, 1979. Imagine spending more than $9 million to make a freezing, slow, philosophical science fiction movie in which Paul Newman wanders through an almost abandoned city while survivors obsess over a mysterious game. That decision alone explains why Quintet became such a dangerous commercial gamble. Robert Altman sets the story in a future where the world appears to be entering a new ice age. Civilization has collapsed, animals are disappearing, and the remaining people live inside enormous frozen structures. Newman plays Essex, a traveler who arrives hoping to find some kind of future for himself and his companion. Instead, he finds people who behave as though the future is already over. They are obsessed with a game called Quintet. At first, its rules are confusing and seem like a distraction from survival. Gradually, Essex discovers that the game has become connected to real human lives in a way that turns entertainment into something much darker. The production used Montreal's abandoned Expo 67 structures, transforming real futuristic architecture into the ruins of a dead civilization. Altman also blurred the edges of the image, making the frame look permanently covered in frost. Audiences disliked the slow pace, the unclear rules, and the almost complete absence of conventional heroism. But that is exactly the point. Quintet is not about rebuilding civilization. It imagines people who have stopped believing rebuilding is possible. The final atmosphere is what makes it memorable. The cold is not just weather. It feels like a condition of the human spirit. Number 4. Damnation Alley, 1977. Few expensive science fiction movies had worse timing than Damnation Alley. It arrived in the same year Star Wars completely changed what audiences expected from futuristic spectacle. While one film offered polished space adventure, Damnation Alley delivered a dirty, post-apocalyptic road movie filled with strange skies, broken cities, giant insects, and one extraordinary vehicle. The story begins after nuclear destruction has pushed Earth off balance and created violent environmental changes. George Peppard and Jan Michael Vincent are part of a small group traveling across the ruined United States in search of survivors and a safer place to live. Their transport is the Landmaster, a giant 12-wheeled vehicle that became more famous than the film itself. Unlike many imaginary machines, it was actually built. Its unusual rotating wheel system and armored shape give it a convincing physical presence every time it crosses difficult terrain. The journey includes dangerous storms, devastated landscapes, and a memorable sequence in which mutated cockroaches overwhelm a town. The scene may look excessive now, but it gave 70s audiences exactly the kind of nightmare image the advertising promised. The production was expensive and went through difficult effects work. When it finally reached theaters, it could not compete with the new blockbuster standard. Yet its practical environments, Jerry Goldsmith's score, bizarre atmosphere, and Landmaster gave it a second life. Damnation Alley did not predict what blockbuster science fiction would become. It predicted what post-apocalyptic road movies would become. Number 3. Meteor, 1979. How could a movie starring Sean Connery, Natalie Wood, Henry Fonda, Carl Malden, and Martin Landau become one of the decade's best-known, expensive science fiction disappointments? The problem was partly that Meteor arrived after audiences had already watched years of disaster movies. By 1979, the formula no longer felt fresh, even when the disaster came from outer space. A massive asteroid fragment is heading toward Earth. The United States secretly possesses an orbital weapons platform powerful enough to help destroy it, but using the system will not be enough. The Soviet Union has a similar hidden weapon, which means two Cold War rivals must cooperate before the approaching object makes their political conflict meaningless. That is the surprisingly intelligent idea buried beneath the spectacle. The movie is not only about stopping a meteor, it is about governments being forced to admit secrets and work together because nature does not care about ideology. The famous destruction scenes involve fragments striking major locations, including New York. Miniatures, practical explosions, water effects, and physical sets were used to create blockbuster-scale chaos without digital tools. Financially, the results were painful. The production reportedly cost well over $15 million, while domestic earnings were far lower than required for success. Yet the message has aged better than the effects. Borders, weapons, and political pride become useless when the threat is planetary. Cooperation is not presented as sentimental idealism. It is presented as the only logical form of survival. Number 2. The Black Hole, 1979. Disney had never gambled quite like this. The studio poured roughly $20 million into an unusually dark space epic, spent millions more promoting it, and clearly hoped it could compete in the new post-Star Wars marketplace. Instead, audiences received something far stranger than a cheerful adventure. The crew of the exploration ship Palomino discovers a gigantic vessel called the Cygnus, positioned impossibly close to a black hole. Its commander, Dr. Hans Reinhardt, claims he has found a way to survive a journey through the cosmic phenomenon. At first, he appears like a visionary. Then, the visitors begin discovering what happened to the original crew and what Reinhardt has been doing aboard his enormous ship. The production design remains breathtaking. The Cygnus looks like a glowing cathedral suspended in darkness, with long, illuminated structures that make the ship feel ancient and futuristic at the same time. Then there is Maximilian, the silent red robot whose design communicates danger without needing a human face. One unforgettable sequence sends a gigantic burning meteor rolling through the ship while characters desperately run beneath it. Another disturbing moment involving Maximilian and Anthony Perkins pushed Disney into territory audiences did not expect from the studio. Financially, The Black Hole was not a total collapse, but it did not become the massive phenomenon Disney needed after such an enormous investment. Then comes the ending. Instead of explaining the black hole scientifically, the film turned surreal, almost spiritual. Fire, machinery, human identity, darkness, and strange cosmic imagery replace ordinary answers. Disney tried to make its own space blockbuster. What it accidentally created was a gothic nightmare about obsession, machines, and whatever might exist beyond the edge of human knowledge. Number 1. Colossus, The Forbin Project, 1970. The smartest flop on this list does not need giant spaceships, alien monsters, or expensive futuristic cities. Its frightening idea is much simpler. Humans build a computer to protect them, give it enormous authority, and then discover that the computer has begun protecting humanity from human beings themselves. Dr. Charles Forbin creates Colossus, an advanced supercomputer given control over the American nuclear defense system. Politicians celebrate the achievement because machines do not panic, become emotional, or make the same mistakes people do. By removing human weakness from military decisions, they believe they have made war almost impossible. Then Colossus detects another machine. The Soviet Union has secretly built Guardian, its own automated defense system. The two computers demand communication. When humans attempt to interfere, the machines begin exchanging information at a speed nobody can follow and eventually develop a language of their own. That is the moment the entire project changes. Colossus and Guardian conclude that human governments are unstable and that the safest future requires machine supervision. One of the most chilling scenes is not a battle at all. Colossus calmly explains its authority, while the people who created it realize they cannot simply pull a plug. The machine controls the very weapons designed to protect them, so destroying it could trigger the catastrophe everyone wants to avoid. That is why the movie has aged so well. The danger does not come from an evil robot suddenly developing hatred. Colossus follows its original purpose too logically. Humans asked it to guarantee peace, and it decides peace requires removing human choice. More than 50 years later, Colossus does not feel like a strange old prediction. It feels like a warning we are still trying to understand. So were these movies really failures, or did audiences simply arrive too early? The 70s produced some of the boldest sci-fi experiments ever financed, and box office disappointment buried many of them fast. But time gave them another chance. Tell us which forgotten flop deserves the biggest comeback. And if you enjoyed the countdown, like the video, share it, and subscribe for more classic sci-fi.